Nick, brother, welcome to the Unbreakable Man podcast, brother. It's been a minute since I've seen you here in Austin. Obviously, you came through one of my breathwork experiences, had a pretty powerful experience yourself, and right now you are in the Ukraine, and you are filming and doing the due diligence to really tell a dramatic story, and not just I'll say the word dramatic, but just like tell the truth about what is happening in that country. And so let's just start there, man. Like what's actually going down? Like what's actually happening in the Ukraine that like we are not getting in the United States?
I would think the overall sentiment that you kind of get in the United States and you kind of see through the media is like this idea that Russia is just this big army of conscripts and that Ukraine is taking it to them. But if we're really talking about this in reality terms, uh, a lot of people are dying on both sides, and it's starting to become this sort of ruling war that is not really portrayed. I don't think
Mm,
it's best back home.
yeah.
But at the same time, I think, you hear sentiment in America at the moment where people are like, oh, they're growing wary, they're wanting to give up. People still hold out hope for winning and
Yeah.
hopefully moving forward with it. But people are very, very tired as well. And I think that's something that, also may not be told as much. People are getting really exhausted. I mean, this thing has been going on for almost 2 years now. It's going to come up on 2 years pretty soon here up in February.
Yeah.
So I would say that's kind of like the overall sentiment that's going on here. But the casualty rate is really high, and overall it's wearing on the population for sure.
Yeah. I mean, do you foresee an end to this thing?
It depends, because when we look at kind of how Ukraine sees victory, or at least some people within um, higher levels of government see victory, it's going to vary. Zelensky is the guy that you see pounding away at the idea that we need to take everything back, take everything back. Recently, his general came out with an essay talking about, hey, this thing's at a stalemate. We got to find a way to either to push the initiative here. We're going to need some sort of technological breakthrough really to get this ball rolling and to get us advancing. Because right now it's World War One with drones. That's what it's
Yeah.
come to. Because every other sort of military technology that's being used has practically become obsolete unless it's artillery and drones. Because each side has specific technologies that offset the other. And the only things that they really have left that are effective are infantry and artillery.
Yeah.
And that just creates this grueling, bogging type of warfare. So as far as where it ends, it's difficult to say, because either side has been fighting each other for a year and a half.
Yeah.
They know each other, they know how they fight, they know what they're doing, and not only now they have drones, so they not only know each other's tactics, but they know exactly what each side is doing at all times.
Yeah.
So you're seeing now where it's considered a victory if you take a kilometer of ground
Mm,
on a front that stretches the entire eastern part of the country. And if you
yeah.
look at that in the long term, it's grueling, and it's how many people are dying on that kilometer of ground is colossal. So it's really hard to say who ends up winning. I think it really depends on the Western sentiment and how wary people in America or in the EU become of distributing aid towards Ukraine, which
Yeah.
has started to become, you feel that. I mean, I watch the news in America, I see on Instagram, people are saying, like, man, I can't pay my damn taxes and sending money over to Ukraine.
Yeah.
One bad bill and I'm over the top. Why are we saying Ukraine? So it's going to depend greatly on that, I think, because without Western aid, Ukraine won't last more than 2 weeks with Russia. They really do need us.
Yeah. If you had to think about like what success would mean for Ukraine, would it be a sovereign state, or what does that look like?
It depends on who you talk to. When you talk to the majority of people in Ukraine, the overall sentiment is it's either we get back everything that they took or nothing.
Yeah.
We don't want any other sort of like settlements. Because I mean, think about it from their perspective. Obviously, in America, it's like, man, I want to get my taxes done. But from here, people's family members were killed
Yeah.
in the early on stages of the war. People have sons and daughters fighting that were killed. and there has to be some sort of closure to that. And the other thing too is if they negotiate like a peace settlement for the conflict, it's going to leave Zelensky kind of described as having an open wound, and potentially another ticking time bomb that could go off at any moment, because you have this entire population, 44 million people, or probably less than that now since the war has gone on, that are saying that don't have that closure.
Yeah.
And, unless they're immediately sent into NATO, which is another issue, Russia could always regroup those troops and then finally take another offensive, because Russia can't really go on the offensive at the moment because they're too bogged down in trying to hold the line that they already have.
Yeah.
If you give them a 6-month ceasefire, they can go back and put together these big tactical groups and then go for another like charge through and get closer to Kyiv or get closer to Kharkiv, and try and redo and already know the mistakes they made in the past and correct them to do it better, so to speak. So Kyiv knows that too, and they're like, we don't want to give these dudes time to do something like that, or we don't want to have our society live with that open wound for years on end and have to coexist with a country that killed. I mean, we're looking at right now close to I think it was something around like, the official count is like 170 to 190,000 Ukrainian casualties. It could be higher, nobody knows.
Yeah.
Have that staggering number and have that wound sitting there, it's going to be very difficult for people to sit with that.
Yeah, and that's even the big question is like, from the Russians front, let's say they win, then what? You have a populace of individuals that don't want you around, and what does that look like? I guess now that they're sitting in a stalemate, what is their desire, I guess, from the Russian perspective? What are they looking to achieve?
I think Putin knows that they have the advantage in the long run. I think in a war of attrition, Russia is 3 times the size of the Ukraine population.
Yeah.
So the longer this drags out, the more it works in Russia's favor. Because in reality, a lot of people in Russia actually support this war, which is another thing in America. Think like, oh, America, there's tons of people in Russia that are against the war. And obviously Russia's going to have issues internally with that. But in reality, there's actually a significant portion of the population that supports the war. It's not to say that there aren't people in Russia that don't support it. I've met people that fled the country to avoid being drafted to countries like Georgia or Finland.
Yeah.
But you see that, and the fact that they can rely on that public support, even after they've suffered ungodly amount of casualties, 200,000 plus.
Yeah.
The latest number I saw in the U.S. official said 300,000. We obviously don't know if that's the actual count, but that's their estimate: 300,000 people that have casualties of this war in Russia, but they're still rallying behind it. And you see that rallying cry there versus Ukraine, where their population needs to support it, but more than anybody, they need the West to support this conflict for them to stay in it in the long term. So they're reliant on public support from the West over 2, 3, maybe even 4 years down the line to stay in this. So when you look at Russia, they have populations 3 times the size of Ukraine and a population that supports the conflict, and Russia doesn't need as much external support as Ukraine does to fund their military. And that can present problems down the line, because now you're reliant on American taxpayers to stay in the fight, whereas Russia's got its own people. And they do receive support from other countries like North Korea, like they get artillery shells from them, but that can present problems down the line for sure, where you're looking at over as time goes on, it's going to be very difficult for Western support to stay very high and continue the aid that's being sent here.
Yeah, and kind of from your insider perspective, what was the motive even for Putin to go in?
So the motive that he portrayed to the Russian people was, Ukraine is a country that's run by Nazis, and we need to rid their government of Nazis, and we need to liberate the Russian-speaking people of the Donetsk and the Luhansk, Zaporizhia Oblasts, say that they're being occupied by this evil Nazi regime, and oust them. And then the other reason that they were barking onto is NATO's expanding its borders. They're they're threatening to destroy Russia. We're not going to live in a world where Russia doesn't exist.
Yeah.
That's the official narrative. What I think is much different, and I don't think this is talked about as much, is I feel there's a very big emotional component to this that most people seem to miss. And that's, I go back to I try to make this conflict, to dumb it down to like relationships.
Yeah.
So how I describe this war and why Russia did what it did is Ukraine and Russia have been in this toxic relationship for a long time. You say Ukraine's the girl, Russia's the dude. Yeah. Russia abuses the crap out of her physically, mentally. Anytime Ukraine tries to say what she wants in the relationship, Russia just tells her to shut up and stay in line with what he wants. Yeah. Russia, he doesn't have a lot of economic prospects. He's not doing too well economically. He's having sometimes trouble holding down a good job. Yeah. And Ukraine has been in this abusive relationship with this country for a long time, forcing them to be poor as well and not perform economically very well in the long term. Yeah. And these people are looking at how people that are in relationships with countries like America and UK and Britain are living. They're like, why can't I have that? Why can't I live that sort of lifestyle? So they go over there and they see the United States living the kind of lives that they are. And they're like, hey, maybe I should hop off this Russia train and like break up with Russia and go get in a relationship with the United States. But in my opinion, the United States is its own issue, because the United States, I kind of view as like a playboy. He's a player, total player. The United States lives in a penthouse in NYC, has all this money and these prospects. And he sees Ukraine and he sees the kind of stuff that he can get out of this relationship. And he's thinking, oh man, I could totally milk this because I hate that Russian guy. I want to come get back at him. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sell the world on this idea that we're all about, I love Ukraine for who she is and her desires, and I want what's best for her. I want her to be a free and democratic country. When in reality, what this player wants is to get, you hear like US politicians talk about it, like, oh, it's a great investment for America to be using these troops to weaken the Russian military. So the United States is this playboy that says, we're going to milk this Ukraine thing until we've reached the max point where it can no longer gain public support, and then we're just going to dump her because we just want to get back at America. We want to get back at Russia. We want to gain that political advantage. Putin knows that. Putin's not stupid. The boyfriend is over there thinking, oh, this guy just wants to do is get back. He doesn't really care about the well-being of Ukraine alone. So let's be honest. When we talk about the investments that are being used to fund this war, I think it's clear in the sand that the United States is going to somewhat try and pull what they've done in Iraq and Afghanistan in the past. We're going to pro-democratize, we're going to raise the military, we keep everything going, and there's need for the wind. In Vietnam, they did the same thing. And I think Russia sees that and says, I don't want this, blah, blah, blah. We're going to come up with all these excuses. But in reality, what I really think Russia doesn't want is to see their baby go to the hands of someone they don't like. And the thing is, Ukraine and Russia have very strong religious, the birthplace of the Orthodox Church is in Kyiv. So, and Putin is a very devout Orthodox Christian. And he sees this kind of stuff, and the prospect of having the birthplace of his religion fall under the control and the influence of the dude he does not like by any means and knows is just trying to get back at him, doesn't care about the well-being of his people, and says, oh, you know what? There's that emotional component of like, I can't stand to watch America do this. Because the Nazi thing, the freedom of Russian-speaking people, I think is fluff to convince the Russian people that this is why we're actually doing this. But in reality, I think there's the emotional component of seeing your longtime girlfriend leave you for someone you really hate. And I think as silly as it sounds, I think that, Putin calls the shots. It's one guy that makes all of the decisions at the end of the day. This is his personal decision. There's not one person in the Russian government that can tell Putin you can't do that. What Putin says goes. There's nobody that can tell him no. Yeah. So I feel like the emotions of one person can dictate the escalation and the starting of a conflict. And I feel that's what happened. I think Putin saw this. Ukraine rightfully wanting to have that sort of freedom and that economic opportunity that can be presented in the United States, even if it means getting into a relationship with someone they kind of know is kind of a player. I mean, you can see Zelensky seeing it now. Like Zelensky is really pushing for aid, and he feels he's being played a little bit because the United States is giving them just enough aid not to for them to win, but for them to maintain front lines. It's kind of like the United States is the player that doesn't want to fully commit.
Yeah,
that's exactly what it's like. They know that if they don't want to fully commit to it, they want to make it drag out so they can, pull money from it.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the day, Putin was like, I've had enough when I'm not letting this happen, and just rolled them in. But it's obviously very complicated. That's my trying to simplify it as much as I can.
Yeah.
For people to understand, but there's so many moving parts. So
right. From your insider perspective, obviously you've been there. How long have you been there?
I've been here over a year now. So I got here in August of last year.
Okay. Yeah. And from what you've seen, versus what the media is portraying, like maybe paint us a picture of what you physically have experienced in the Ukraine during the war.
I think this has always been kind of an issue. I think in the beginning of the war, the media did a good job of telling the stories of people that were ordinary civilians, people that had their lives torn apart by the war.
Yeah.
So for the first 3 months of the war, we saw a lot of that. But as time has dragged on and interest kind of faded away from the American public, you don't see that much anymore. What you'll see is just a lot of talking heads like the Zelenskys and the Bidens talking about aid and things along those lines. But what's not being portrayed, and I think I've been seeing all the time, is the pain and destruction that this has caused upon ordinary people.
Mm-hmm.
Because the way in which I'm living here, I'm not just housed up in some apartment by myself. I'm living with the people in a hostel. In a hostel here, I live on an 8-bedroom dorm with these people. And now and then you'll run into people that were either fighting on the front or had to evacuate from the frontline city because their houses got bombed. And just having to sit there and speak to these people, you can feel the pain and the suffering that they've incurred. And it's not just going through a breakup room. It's like, I lost my entire home. My kid got killed. I watched my entire unit just be eliminated right before my eyes. And I'm the only one left. Why am I the only one left?
Mm.
And you see these kind of, I've experienced these stories myself firsthand and talking to dozens, at least over 100 times I've heard stories like this at least now. And I think that's not being portrayed enough. And I think you would be good if the mainstream media really tried to dive in and get deeper into those kind of stories, because now we're at the stage, this has gone over for a year, and now we're starting to see the mental effects the war has had on people over time as they've come to sit with what happened.
Yeah.
Because obviously in the beginning, everything's fresh. So you're kind of in that fight or flight. But now people have gotten to sit with it, with whatever they experienced and how that's starting to play in their lives. I remember people that are now alcoholics. I've been in hostels where there are soldiers that can only sleep for an hour, maybe 2, or they're sleeping on benches so they don't feel comfortable sleeping inside for some reason, or they're literally on the drink till 3 a.m. because they can't sleep. They're just drowning vodka bottles. And you're living it, you're seeing it. And that's kind of why I came here in the first place, because I knew that was going to be the case. And I wanted to make a film where there is that kind of image of just an ordinary person, what happened, and how that's affected how his life has played out and the consequences.
Yeah.
Of what human conflict portrays upon ordinary people, not just people like Zelensky or these higher ups, like these everyday people. That was really the main mission of why I came here in the first place. And I think that aspect should be portrayed more publicly.
I've been to war, and I've seen the devastation it's caused on families. I've seen the devastation it's caused, just on my own base, man, like seeing the gym get blown up and, and just like some crazy things, man. You just see some stuff that happens. And, kind of lends itself back. And I'm really curious about the film you're creating, and we'll touch on that here in a second. But if you had to think about, like you mentioned, that if the West supports this, then it could potentially help Ukraine achieve sovereignty, and then everything is kind of like, down, like kind of like relaxed for a minute. Maybe there's some peace for a little while. Or if we pull back, like obviously, something else will happen. From your perspective, what's the best case scenario for this war? What can the American people do, whether it is support or the opposite, and call our own government out, or what do you think that could be?
It's difficult to answer, I think, because Ukraine is now in this position where I think, other than them being ascended to NATO, it's going to present problems.
Yeah.
Because now there's this elephant in the room constantly on their minds. If there was like a ceasefire and they freeze the lines where they are right now, and they said this is going to be Russians, right, under the conditions that Ukraine is not allowed to be joined NATO. Now the world has to live with the prospect of the idea that Russia could take advantage of that and invade anytime they please. Because if they're not in NATO, what's going to stop them from regrouping those tactical groups and just rolling back in? Mm-hmm. So the ceasefire issue, unless Ukraine is immediately allowed to join NATO, is going to be an issue. Because Russia's thing, at least what they've been portraying to people, is we don't want American military bases on our borders. And if they freeze the front where it is right now, America could very well still put missile bases on Russia's borders if Ukraine was ascended into NATO. So there's that issue where, for example, the city of Kharkiv, which is like right on the Russian border, and they're being quoted about how America could put missiles in Kharkiv that could reach Russia in 5 minutes.
Yeah,
we're supposed to be okay with that. And the city of Kharkiv, as it stands, is completely occupied by Ukraine. They pushed the Russians out of it. So even if the lines were to be freezed as they are, I don't think that would help. Personally. So it's a really tricky situation. Obviously, the ideal situation would be just if Ukraine had received its territory back and they everybody got along, but it's so complicated that you can't really draw a line in the sand where everything makes sense.
Right.
Here's the thing I'll say about this conflict, and we all know the comparisons where they're like, if Russia were to put missiles in Mexico, America would do the same thing. Yes. Of course they would enter there. Of course they would do it. That's just how this game is played.
Yeah.
However, I don't think this is a game that is necessarily one that is a good one for humanity to play. And I think it's based upon power games of these higher ups rather than what the people want themselves. And what we're seeing in Russia, while yes, America would play the same card, doesn't make it necessarily right. And the thing that Ukraine is fighting for at the moment is something people, particularly in America, have not had to fight for in a very long time.
Yeah,
which is the ability to be free. I mean, when we look at countries in Europe, in mainland Europe, they had to fight for that stuff 80 years ago when Hitler rolled through? That's very recent. And that's the thing you'll see. People in Europe pay much closer attention to this conflict than people in America. Yeah. The outlets in Europe cover this. In my experience, I see them cover it much more in detail than American outlets do. Because it's obviously it's close to them, so it's a little bit more important, more tense. But I think also part of it knows these people over 2 generations removed from the Nazis, Soviets.
Yeah.
Who collectively conquered much of Europe and told them, you can't say what you want to say. You can't live the way you want to live. You live how the state wants you to live. And I think for people in America, we don't have that. That hasn't happened collectively. Yeah. Obviously, you can make the arguments maybe for African Americans, for example, the civil rights, but maybe that's there. You could draw a line between Ukrainians moves for independence and African Americans for their rights within America. Maybe you could draw that line there. But as collectively, as an entire nation, We haven't had that since the American Revolution.
Right.
That was 300 years ago. So we don't understand it. And I think you can see that disconnect with the American people. The thing is we talk about our government, and we talk about how, our government does X and Y, and we don't like it because we think it's corrupt and doing this, of course. But the beautiful thing about America that I've noticed is you could say these things and not go to jail or prison. And I'm not talking, because in America, obviously they'll try and character assassinate you, but that's usually only people that have achieved so much power that they have to somehow find a way to rip them down. I'm talking ordinary dudes on Twitter. Like if you're like some guy that's like 22 years old and you want to say, hey, Joe Biden, you suck. You can do that all night. You can do that all day long. Hey, or you don't even have to go. You can go at the American oligarchs. You're like, oh, BlackRock, you guys really suck. Nothing's going to happen to you. Absolutely zip. If you're somebody that doesn't hold like this crazy amount of power, it's not really going to happen. If you say that stuff in Russia, or if you're out publicly protesting, you go to jail.
Yeah.
There are journalists that have investigated Russia's government for performing specific corrupt decisions. They go missing or they die.
Yeah.
And this is the kind of world that Ukraine, unfortunately, would have to be subjected to if Russia were to come out on top. And so, as much as I understand America, we have our own issues, and understandably so. And obviously, we do need to focus on those issues. But they have to understand, like, why is Zelensky asking for all this money? It's, what would you do if you were in Zelensky's shoes? Would you be like, we need more money. I understand the homelessness crisis in America is out of control, so we're not going to ask for money. Like, that's not their perspective. Like this, there are hundreds of thousands of people dead in this, over 100,000 people dead in this. And in this conflict, and it's ravaging cities, just eviscerating them from the ground.
Yeah.
So I think it's important for people in America to understand, yes, we have our problems. Maybe freedoms are being restricted via these social media platforms, whatever it may be. But these are basic fundamentals that this country is dealing with. I think that obviously getting back to that root and being like, hey, we understand. I do think it's totally feasible to hold our government accountable while still helping Ukraine. I think we're fighting you. Ukraine is getting, I think, 3% of America's total defense budget and fighting Russia. Just 3% in total. And I think obviously that's a huge number on paper.
Still a big number.
Like $1 billion. It's still a huge number.
Yeah, it's a big number.
Speaking proportionally, obviously that American defense budget can come down a little bit and be put towards programs that help America actually deal with problems like the drug crisis and all those other issues that people are constantly referenced to. But I still think it's totally feasible to continue to support a cause like this while still aiding those other problems. Now, is America doing that? No, I don't think America is a country at the moment that's doing its best to put its people first. But I do think it's possible for America to make those changes while simultaneously supporting a population that is having its democracy completely put at risk and destabilizing Europe as a region at whole. Because if Russia wins this war, it's not like Europe's going to go completely back to normal like that. Everything's going to be whacked out. There's going to be partisan warfare within Ukraine. I guarantee you that, for example, in the Second World War, we had when the Soviets pushed back the Germans, there were Ukrainian resistance units fighting the Russians up into the 50s after the war ended in guerrilla warfare in the mountains in Western Ukraine. So if this war ends conventionally, it certainly isn't going to end in a guerrilla state, a partisan way, for years even after that, which will still be destabilizing the region. So I think it's just important to sum it down. Obviously, I understand America has its issues. We should hold our government accountable to address these issues. But I still think it is feasible, concern 3%, that's it, to put money into those issues and address them while still supporting democracy in this part of it.
Yeah. And there's clearly an interest, for the American government to be there. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there. We still don't know exactly what it is. I mean, and I don't want to speculate as to what it could be. Could there be collusion? Could be there corruption? Absolutely. I think there's corruption in every level of every government. And I've seen it in, when you're when I was in the Middle East, it was, and that's at every level. It was like the police chief's uncle, knows a guy who knows, it's like, and if you don't pay that guy, then you can't get across the checkpoint. So he can't go, go to work and feed his family. It's like wild stuff that happens on every level. And yeah, I totally agree with you. It's something that I think the American people are not as versed in when it comes to our freedom of speech, and we are starting to get really irritated in the West, in the United States. And I know you were experiencing it before you left, which is, like a simple app, right, can say like, oh, you said this one thing and now your numbers are going to drop because of some algorithm. I had Tim Kennedy on the podcast, and just by tagging him in my stories, my numbers on Instagram dropped it by half. And it was, wild. And it was just like, it was like literally like this like little screen popped up. Was like, are you sure you want to tag this person? Because they have gone against our community guidelines. And I'm like, yeah, like I'm going to tag this person. Like, why should me tagging somebody, just automatically drop my numbers? And so like that for me was pretty frustrating. And so we see it. Yeah. Like we have still the ability in the West, the freedom of speech in the sense that we can keep speaking and holding our leaders accountable, and for as much as we want, I guess, not to say that it actually happens. We'll time will tell if certain things, disclosures will be coming out in the United States, and I think they will in the near future. But I'm not a guy that's on the ins. I don't know the ins and outs, and frankly, I don't want to. Like it's not my job to know the ins and outs of the American government and all the darkness that we sitting on. So, with that said, man, it's like obviously you're living your life in the United States, like going about your day. You're an entrepreneur. I saw you had actually, and I'll link it up in the description in the of this episode. You have a pretty cool like 30-minute YouTube video of like your story here in Austin and what sent you over there. So anybody that is interested can watch that video. Thinking about what story you want to tell though in the Ukraine and why you went. You mentioned it a little bit earlier, but like, what is that? What do you want to bring to light that we otherwise are not seeing from our perspective in the West?
Ordinary people. I think it's that simple. And I think when we're talking about geopolitical issues, there's a big tendency to highlight the conversations and decisions being made by the higher ups, the Zelenskys and the Bidens. That's who come across when you hear about Ukraine. You see those faces all the time. But how often is the American public seeing the faces of ordinary people and the consequences of humanity collectively when wars are started? And I think not only for people to see that, but to see it from an emotional perspective. I didn't want to make this kind of like one of those things where we're doing like one of those investigative documentaries where you're highlighting specific pieces of information and saying, this guy is wrong for this guy is wrong for that. They should prosecute it for this. This film is not an argument.
Yeah.
It's just a story. It was something that I made out of love at the end of the day. And something that I felt was necessary for people to perceive in that manner. Because when we look at the news, people are pointing fingers. In Russia, they're pointing fingers. In America, they're pointing fingers. It's very much news, in my eyes, can be very much turned into a form of war. I mean, it's propaganda warfare.
Very, very
there are Ukrainian Telegram channels. They live in their own bubble. At least the super pro-Ukrainian ones. And then the Russian Telegram channels, they live in their own bubble. So they're only getting the information that, to reinforce their belief in their cause. But at the end of the day, regardless of which side it is, everybody's pointing fingers. There's arguments being made, slandering. And when I made this, obviously there are things that I made in this story that highlight the atrocities that were committed with Dima, the the protagonist of my story, incurred during his escape from Ukraine, but it also highlights the humanity that he incurred along the way from either side of the war. And it just highlights the meaninglessness of it all.
Yeah.
And the emotion that you could see on his face. Because I remember when I made the question, because I had talked to him before we did the interviews for the film, and I made sure that when I structured the questions, I was really poking at things that would be difficult for him to talk about, but I felt would really have an emotional connection to people watching. Not so much what happened here, what happened, why did this happen, what unit was this guy from, did he give you a badge number, blah, 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 blah. No, it's like, how do you feel about that when you see this, when you go through that, when this happened to you? And just highlighting those emotions to really make that connection. Because I think that's what's missing. I think what the American people are missing is that emotional connection. If you're watching Zelensky battle on about getting aid all the time, and you'd be like, God, why does this guy always want my damn money? Like, that's probably what you think after a while. It's like that one guy just keeps begging you for money. It's like, screw this. Why am I going to keep supporting this? But if the video is put out, the guy just genuinely telling a story without trying to push an agenda, and how his life was torn apart because that would happen, I think that's going to speak to people. And I think that's, at the end of the day, is what I wanted to bring light to, was the emotional aspect of this war. And for it to come from an American filmmaker. Because obviously, like, cultural differences can make it hard for people to really resonate with the message if you don't understand an American audience. So I wanted to be that kind of beacon, be that connection.
Yeah.
With America, with Europe, and with the West.
Yeah.
Really like that.
And why is it important for the American people to be connected to that emotion?
I think it's because America geographically is far from a lot of the world. I mean, when a lot of the issues that we feel emotionally are mostly domestic, but we often don't. I think it's hard sometimes for people to really resonate with what's going on over there if they don't emotionally feel it. I think in countries like Germany or the United Kingdom or in Poland, it's much easier for them to feel that emotion because it's on their doorstep. There are refugees that are flowing into their countries, telling them stories about what had happened. Mm-hmm. And they don't need to see it on film for them to really get that message. However, I still think that it would be good to show it in front of a German audience and the UK audience, because they're still quite distant from it. But they're not nearly as distant from the United States. Everybody in Germany and in Poland has met Ukrainian refugees. I did a little backpacking excursion for like a month when I was taking a break from Ukraine. And I went to Germany, I went to Czech Republic, went to Poland, I went to all of them. And all of them knew somebody that was a refugee to some extent and heard stories.
Yeah.
I don't think you could say that about America. I mean, the population of Ukrainian refugees in America is much lower than it is in places like Poland.
Yeah.
Per capita, for sure. So I think that was important, because I think just America is just so far. Like, how can you understand if you don't feel it? Mm-hmm. It's on the other side of the world. It's a 19-hour flight to get this joint,
Yeah. 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 And again, kind of even just to kind of get even deeper is, like, let's say we do feel connected to that. What would come out of that? What would be the effect? Like, what would that experience be for the American people?
The goal of the film would be like, I want you guys to start donating. Yeah. That's not why I made it. I didn't make it. I want you to start hating the Russians. I want you to start condemning Putin. The goal of the film was just compassion.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I think the most important thing to do, like, as a citizen, for the human, is just to stay informed as to what's going on. Because I think one of the worst things that could happen is for conflict that's taking so many lives as it is to just vanish from public eye. And we're seeing that right now with the Israel-Hamas conflict. Obviously, what's happening there is horrendous. But you can obviously tell Ukraine is a little worried about public perception being completely taken away from suffering that they have been incurring for over a year and a half for that conflict, just for the sole reason that it's fresh. I believe both conflicts deserve very much to be covered and to be seen because they're both horrendous. But obviously, like that's their big worry is like people are going to stop caring. People are going to stop caring, and nobody's going to give a shit anymore.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what just for people to give a shit. Doesn't mean you got to go empty your credit card and go buy a bunch of tank ammunition for some brigade over there in Ukraine. You don't need to do all that. Like just check your phone and like scroll up through an article that's like a minute or two to read, put it back and go about today and just be like, oh, I feel for those people. That's it. Period.
Yeah. It's a tough conversation to be had, but I think it's an important one. Ultimately, from my perspective, like bullets don't create peace. And I used to like be really indoctrinated to believe that, freedom isn't free and that we need to fight for freedom and all these things. And like, to some extent, like, absolutely, we need to like hold boundaries and like, know when to stand up and say no. But at the end of the day, and what you're describing is compassion is the place that we need to take ourselves and take the American people to understand the humanity of the individuals in this conflict, because it's not just some geopolitical thing on the other side of the world that we hate that our government is sending money to help these people. It's like, yeah, these are real humans having real experiences. And could there be consequences to the United States if we don't support? Maybe, like, I don't know the ins and outs of, what's behind the veil, if you will, of this conflict. But I think at the end of the day, all of us can agree that human life is something to be valued and virtued. And if we can feel the sensation of compassion for all individuals, and that includes within ourselves, then I think war can be a thing of the past. I know that, the warrior energy still lives inside of us all, but can we use that for good, right? Can we use that to increase, or not increase, but like to change the way we build, buildings so that they're more, eco-friendly, or, create forest cities, or, whatever that might look like. Can we bring that warrior energy and turn it into something that is positive and protective for all of humanity, and rather than just, kind of playing pissing matches on, well, I don't want you on my border and I want this border. And it's like, it just creates havoc over time. And so, I definitely agree with what you're doing and what you're bringing to light. And so, which then begs the question of like, how can, people support what you're doing, and how can they watch the film, and where can they go?
So right now, I'm hosting a Kickstarter to get this thing off the ground.
Cool.
The film is completely done. Start to finish, it's ready to be shown. There are certain fees, just like licensing that need to pay for. There needs to be insurance, there needs to be legal fees, kind of things that I don't have the money to get this thing off the ground, and need a little bit of help. So at the moment, what I'm doing is I'm running a Kickstarter up until November 30th. I don't know when this is going to air, but hopefully it'll probably be up before the 30th. I think that's a few weeks from now. But just trying to get this thing off the ground. And once that's complete, we're aiming for a release date, hopefully with the early next year, maybe February or March. Where hasn't been decided yet, but goal right now is just to get it off the ground. So if I can't get this thing with the bees off the ground, can't show it.
Yeah, absolutely. So where do you anticipate premiering the film?
Also up in the air. I mean, I don't know where I'm going to be geographically. That's another thing too. Like it very hinges on how this campaign goes. If it doesn't work out, I might be still in Europe. If it does work out, I might be able to go back to the United States and maybe do a premiere over there. Maybe a little theatrical thing, do a little premiere, whatever it may be. Maybe in Austin, maybe in San Diego, and then it's kind of up in the air at the moment.
Very cool, man. Very cool. So yeah, we'll definitely do our best to get this one up. There's a couple other episodes in the hopper, but maybe I could talk to my producer and push you up so we can get you out there and get more guys and just people interested in what you're doing. Obviously, I think it's really important, bringing the light and just awareness to war and how war affects the humans. I think for all men, like they absolutely need that. I think, a lot of us as men, like we carry a sense of warrior energy, and I mentioned that earlier, but I think it's really important to know both. We think about the old, curmudgeon warrior, the veterans that are, like either on the street or just like PTSD. But war, for me, honestly, has brought so much goodness from my own learning and my own personal development and my own growth. But I don't, not to say that I agree with war. I don't necessarily agree with war anymore. Where I was maybe, when I was a young man, I'm going to fight for freedom, and now I'm like, wait, there's a battle within our own hearts to witness our own fears and our own shadows and doubts and shame. And I think that's where, war is really the battlefield with no enemy, as I like to call it. So, yeah, man. Any last words you want to share with the audience?
I would say this. You mentioned you picked on it earlier when you talked about the idea of how compassion is what is needed more so than fighting wars with bullets and moving that forward. I would think for anybody listening, everybody asks, like, how can you stop wars? Like, why do these things keep happening? And I think these pointing finger conversations have been happening for thousands of years. And people act as if pointing these fingers and leveling these sanctions upon other countries is somehow going to solve, or making these invasions is somehow going to solve it. But at the end of the day, it's never a specific country that is the problem. It's in these situations, these wars, they're never black and white. They're always gray. So it begs the question, like, who is responsible? I always say it's not Hamas or Israel or Russia, Ukraine, whoever. It's us collectively.
Yeah.
And I think that's something, obviously you personally may not feel like you are directly part of the conflict. Like, you in your house in Austin, Texas, you're not launching mortars from your house over to Ukraine or to Israel or Gaza or wherever. But how we present ourselves in the world and how we address our own pain contributes to the collective. Obviously, because before the mind shapes the world shapes the mind. And before new minds come into our world, we are the responsible ones fostering that world, the systems that it has.
Yeah.
So unless obviously you're within your right to never look at your pain and never deal with it, then obviously the world's not going to end if you don't. But the world's going to be a much better place if you do.
Yeah.
And I think like I do the recycling thing. Like, if you stop recycling for the rest of your life, there's probably not going to be a bunch of sea animals that are dead by the end of it. You're not going to make a huge dent. But if everybody stops, doesn't do it, then the world's going to have a problem. I view as dealing with our own pain, our own shadow, the same way.
Yeah.
Sure, you can live your rest of your life not dealing with it, but it's contributing to the rest of the world. I don't want to bring shame upon anybody, but this is the truth, man.
Yeah.
How you address, how you show up in the world is going to determine which way you want the world to move. That's why they say the best thing you can do is to work on yourself and to become your true self. Because that's the only thing that's going to stop these things from happening. Nobody in a mind of calmness and fulfillment is going to make these decisions to start war and to commit these acts of violence that kick them off.
Yes.
So that's what I would say to the audience is, you are the solution.
Yeah.
You just got to go kick some butt, go confront those demons, baby.
Yeah.
That's
right.
it.
That's the war, like the war within the war, the battlefield with no enemy kind of thing. And I mean, like, kind of to just touch on it, like, real quickly, it's the ripple effect is real. How you treat the guy at the Firestone tire shop, right, is going to ripple into how he treats his employees, is going to ripple into, how they, it's like, you have no idea the impact you have just by being steadfast and have peace of mind and just have a regulated nervous system that allows for others to feel at ease. It has a tremendous ripple effect. It doesn't mean you have to write books or make films or do a podcast or any of that. It just, like, be good, be a good human. But in order to do that, you have to integrate your own fears and your own shadows. And I genuinely believe that is the solution to ending war on this planet. I really do. Because you'll see yourself in so many.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, if you're bogged down in your own stuff, compassion has no room to grow.
Yeah.
If you don't have the space within yourself to hold it for other people,
Yeah.
then and you're constantly bogged down in your own crap, how is the world going to improve? And not only that, to have that same stuff bogging you down, if it's not properly addressed, it lashes out into and creating that ripple effect. So at the end of the day, if we want to change the world, the compassion has to have room to grow. The only way it grows is if you take all the garbage and the junk that you got in there and start applying it and processing it to the point where you got some space in there, throwing out all the garbage, now you got some room.
Yeah.
And that's the only way, in my opinion. I don't think there is any other way for these things to stop. They've been going on for thousands of years, and the conversations are always the same. So when is the conversation going to shift to this isn't this country's fault, it's our fault collectively?
Yeah.
You never hear that in the news, ever.
Right.
And I think as a society, we have to start shifting towards that kind of thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the hardest part, is taking the responsibility onto the individual, heart and mind. And, I know you and I kind of come from the same cloth on that, which is that's our mission. Like, if we take care of ourselves on the inside, we can hold space for others, and peace can reign. And I think it's, going to the battlefield of your own mind and body, man, your own psyche. You'll find the demons, and that's just it, man. So what's just kind of final thought, what's the name of the film? And if people are looking to watch it or support it, if they don't get ahead of the Kickstarter, like they're listening to this later, is there a Patreon? Is there somewhere else they can go to watch it, or do that?
So film is called Dima, the story of a man who narrowly escaped from Mariupol, Ukraine during the opening weeks of the invasion. Mariupol is a city where 25,000 civilians were killed in the opening weeks of the invasion. It's a very serious incident.
Yeah.
And it's basically about his 300-kilometer escape from Russian occupied territory to get to safety. The film, if you want to stay updated on where I put it out, just follow me on Instagram. I think that's the safest route. Obviously, Kickstarter first. Got to get the sucker off the ground. But if you miss that, on Instagram, my user is I am Nick Allard. Allard is spelled Allard. You can follow me on there, and any updates as to where the film will be released, you can find there.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll link it up in the show notes so anybody can find this film and support the effort, man. I appreciate you coming on all the way from Ukraine. I know we tried this one other time and there was some glitches, but we got to
go. Don't worry about it. It happens.
Yeah, it happens, man, which is great, man. So, well, I wish you the best, brother, and hope to see you back here safe in Austin pretty soon. And we'll get you back.
Thanks for having me on.
All right. See you.
See you.